Hello everyone, we're going to get started in just a few minutes here. In the meantime, could a couple people just verify that they can hear me okay and see my screen okay? Cool, thank you. Give it about one more minute. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Waiting on a few more attendees here, but we've got a lot to cover today, so I want to try to get through it all. So welcome back, everybody. Hopefully, you've attended some of the previous sessions. We are here on part 4 of the hardware asset management webinar series, and today's session is going to focus on notifications, automation, and of course vacations. Last important part of the process here. All right, so quick recap of the other sessions. And if this is your first session or if you missed some others, some of the previous sessions, they are all recorded. They're all on Cireson's Vimeo page. And most recently, I've put links to all of those in the Cireson community. I have a post in there that has links to all the recordings, North America or EMEA region, whichever you're in. And also the last session had some JavaScript code, and that's been uploaded if you'd like to give it a shot yourself. And this session will contain some PowerShell code and trying any of this stuff out for yourself. The recording as well will be available just like all the others are on Vimeo and consolidated in that community page. So in the first couple webinars, so first Mike or Billy gave you an intro to hardware asset management with Service Manager and Cireson, and talked through some stuff that's new, how to install, how to update, really getting you started, or if you've had it installed for a while, getting you back up to speed with where things are now and what's upcoming. And then myself or Jeff, depending on your region, we started talking through asset management procedures in the second webinar. So we talked through different processes to consider and kind of how you might approach that from the very beginning of your asset management implementation. Last session, we was focusing on identifying and overcoming roadblocks. So how to figure out what your weaknesses are, how to remediate those, how you might be able to simplify your environment, limit those mistakes, create customizations to prevent the human error before it ever even comes to be, and reduce that learning curve as well. Bottom line, we want to minimize the mistakes or issues and have a system that's as accurate and easy to use as possible. So today we're going to be looking at that another way. So communication is often an area where things can fall apart, and notifications are a way that we can kind of communicate automated when we don't need to rely on people remembering to keep us in the loop for certain things. We can just kind of trigger a notification to send when maybe certain things happen in our environment. So keeping that communication open and healthy helps to kind of eliminate some of these problems, or at least keep folks in the loop and have a chance to have a successful implementation. So we're going to look at some notifications today that'll help kind of correct those issues in real time. Then we're going to next look at a way, kind of a use case for implementing some automation to really keep the manual effort down, increase consistency with everything that's being done, make sure that it's being done the same time every time, and not, eliminating some of the tediousness that can go from updating records. So we'll look at an example of how you might do that, and then we'll look at where to go from there. So really quick recap of those previous sessions. They'll come up a little bit today. So we looked at the processes to consider from the hardware asset status. We kind of mapped it all out, talked about what statuses can go from what to what. We looked more specifically at the deployment scenario, items that can go from received or in stock to deployed. We identified that these are the fields we wanted to set. Hypothetically, there could be different fields for your implementation. And then that was all the second webinar. And then last webinar, the third of the four, we addressed some of these issues. We simplified the portal forms. We simplified navigation. So pages or fields we weren't using, we just hid them, or we restricted them, so forth, to make sure that it's clear what we need to have set. And then we also created a custom task to deploy a hardware asset. And quick recap of that task is it added a deploy asset task to the hardware asset page that only appeared when an item was in stock or received, because those are the only states where it should be able to be deployed from. And then we prompted for that custodian and that location, which were two of the fields here, custodian, location, and then we just auto set the status and auto set the assigned date. So we took a couple fields out of the analyst's hands. They don't have to remember to set those, and we kind of forced them to set the ones that we do need to have. That is the custodian and the location. So, some similarities with this fourth webinar compared to the third one is we're still addressing these challenges, and there are a lot of ways that these challenges can be addressed. And the bottom line is there's something failing in the process, or something has gone wrong, and we need to correct that. And so today, notifications and automation are an approach to this, and one that you'd use in combination in all likelihood with the stuff that we covered in the last webinar. So today we're gonna start with this scenario. Let's say that our problem, we're gonna move on from the deployment examples here, and we'll say that the problem we're having is the stockroom is piling up with retired equipment, and that needs to be disposed. So, we're supposed to call our e-waste provider a few times a month, or maybe at a certain threshold, and we're just not being kept in the loop when we need to do that. So what I want in this situation as an asset manager is that I need to know immediately when equipment is retired so that I can coordinate pickup with that e-waste vendor. Otherwise it might sit, and this is kind of a breakdown in communication. So, you could first try to address this by saying, hey, remember to let me know when you retire equipment. But that's another thing for the analyst to remember, and that's another thing that they might just not do. And sure, this could be maybe worked into a task of some sort. So there are a lot of different ways that this could be tackled, but one pretty straightforward way is through a notification, just letting us, sending out an email when this happens. So let's go over to the demo, or swing over to the demo. So what I'm going to do is first I am going to make a notification. So before I get into that, I have a couple tools that might be useful if you're an SCSM administrator and you needed to kind of test out some emails. So there's this kind of open source tool called Papercut, just local SMTP server, and it just basically lets you send emails locally. So you can test your emails maybe in a test environment, dev environment, without actually sending anything out and potentially disrupting folks in the workplace. So how I have my notifications configured in Service Manager is they're simply sending to localhost with a bogus email address. That's just we're gonna be able to see how the email is gonna show up there in Papercut without actually sending it out to a real server. Just do a quick search online, Papercut. It used to be on Codeplex, it's now in Git. GitHub if you wanted to pull down the latest version of that. So for a notification, there's two things we have to set up. First and foremost, we need to know the content of the message. What is the message we are trying to send out? And then the second thing we're going to need is when should that message send and to who? So I guess maybe to A, to B. So the first part there, that the content of the message, that is all done through a notification template in Service Manager. So as an administrator, you would go to this template section, create an email template, and I'm going to call it, in this case, webinar retired hardware notification. And the target class, in this case, I'm going to target it at the hardware asset class. And I'm going to make a new management pack. It's called webinar for now. This is not good management pack practice, but we only have an hour. Okay, so I'm going to, first and foremost, I'm going to copy in some HTML, and I will provide this as well if you'd like to play with it. Actually, I'm not going to do that quite yet. I'm going to edit it in there. Well, first, I need to put a message. So we'll say that this is a hardware asset retired. I'll paste in my content. Now, there's a few variables I want to show here. So I have this in this HTML. It's a little funky to edit it in that box in the console. So typically like to store these in just a standalone file, get the nice color coding and whatnot in Notepad++ in this case. Really quick, let me show what this will look like. So this is the template, and like I said, I'm going to provide this as part of the webinar, but it's going to look like this. And there's a few few variables I might want to set in this case. So name, model, serial will do the trick, and of course this will vary depending on your requirements. So I'm going to look for these three variables in the template, and I'm going to replace them rather than just being these placeholders that are hard coded in here. I'm going to make them actual variables. So I look for those three. So there's var name. So I'm just going to delete that and then make sure my cursor's where that just was, and between those p tags, and I'm going to call this display name. Okay, and see how it'll actually replace, it'll insert the variable as this Service Manager specific placeholder. So it looks a little funky here, but it will be replaced here in a moment with the actual name. I'm going to do the same for the model. And then I'm going to do the same for the serial. Okay, I also have a URL in here. I'm not going to bother with that for now, so we have a lot to cover here. Okay, so I've made the template. All right. There is a tool online, not a Cireson tool, but if you do a little search for SCSM template tester, there's a nice little way that you can actually test these out without having to send that email out. So a little management pack you can throw in your environment and see the content, make sure you didn't miss a space or a tab or a HTML tag or anything. Helpful little tool. So I've made the template. Template looks okay, and now I need to make the actual trigger for this. So I go to the subscription section of the console, create subscription, and call this webinar retired hardware asset. Now the notification criteria here, you can do created, updated, or periodically as it meets a criteria. I'm going to do when a class is updated in this case. I'm going to pick the hardware asset class here. And webinar is going to be my template, and that's just fine. I can skip over the group Q selection, just going to apply to everything. In this case, Okay, and on this screen, I can actually set the criteria. So in this case, I want, referring back to my use case here, I want to alert when a asset is retired. So for that, I can pick this hardware asset status field. Be careful not to pick the asset status field. That is a different property altogether out of box in Service Manager. For hardware assets, the ordered, received, in stock, deployed, so forth, that's referring to this HW asset status. So I'm going to set it whenever it does not equal retired, that's changed from, and then changed to, you guessed it, I'm going to alert when it equals retired. Okay, so changing from any other status to retired should make this criteria evaluate to true. And then the template, so when that evaluates to true, what am I going to use? And I'm going to use that template that I just created to send that specific message. Now under recipients, we'll say in this case, if this is a notification for a asset manager, so I would just hard code in that person in this case. You can also do related recipients if you're making a similar notification, notify the custodian or notify the created by or assigned user if it was a work item. So lots of kind of more dynamic recipients that you can do there. And now I'm going to test it out. So I've have to renew my session here. So I've now made that notification, and it's we do want to see it actually fire and make sure that it shows up the way we expect to see it show up. So I have a hardware asset open here. The portal fell asleep on me while I was talking. While that wakes up, I can do it in the console since that's already open. Nope, portal was faster. Actually, I've restricted it, haven't I? So I'm going to change this this stock laptop for webinar here to retired. I would do it in the console, in the portal, but last time we restricted the field, so I don't actually have the ability to, unless I turn that off. So I've now changed that. Now it will take a moment for our workflow to evaluate this. It's not immediate, but can take up to a couple minutes. But what we'll see here in just a moment is that email message that coming out for that specific asset. In this case, it was something called stock laptop for webinar. I don't believe it has a model, so that will probably be blank. Oh, no, it does. It does have a model. It does have a serial. So there we go. There's the message. So hardware asset retired. And so this is everything I need to know to this specific person from this address configured in the notification channel we looked at. And we see the whole message formatted with the converted text and all. So that helps me to know when that hardware asset is retired, and it does so without having anyone at our organization have to remember, oh yeah, I got to let that person know that I retired this equipment or that there's equipment ready for pickup. So that takes a manual step off the plate, ensures it's done consistently. Okay. So let's say we have a new problem here. So notifications, of course, can solve a lot of those issues. You do need to be careful that they don't become noise. If you're sending too many notifications, eventually they just kind of get ignored. But let's say that we have another problem here, and that it's analysts are retiring entire rooms worth of equipment and update, maybe and very relevant use case, at a school, for example, to have a public lab that gets refreshed with a new school year, and so entire rooms of equipment are potentially being retired, and updating inventory has become somewhat tedious or inconsistent. Sometimes it's being done for some, not all. So we want to try to have an easier way for this to be done. So what we're going to do, and what we're going to attempt to show here in the last 30 minutes or so, is some automation, example of automation that uses advanced request offering, Cireson app, and Cireson PowerShell activity. So we're going to have the analyst submit a retirement request, a service request. So a little bit of a tie-in here to service management. And they'll answer questions required by the asset manager. So for example, whose equipment are you retiring, or what equipment are you retiring? Provide some notes, etc. Is this equipment, I don't know, anything you might want to ask. Does it have another intended destination or anything like that? Then the script will run to change the fields that are necessary. So in reality, you're probably going to set, we didn't actually go through what fields to set for retired, we did for deployed. In this example today, we're simply going to set that field. But you might want to do some other things as well, like clear custodian, and maybe there's some other fields you'd like to set. And then we'll see, actually, as we do that, even though this is another method of solving this other problem, that notification we just made will still send. It will still fire as if it was a manually retired asset. So some reuse there of the solutions we've worked on. So a lot to get through here. So let's go and look at back to the console to make this content. So the first thing we need, our goal again, the first step is to make an advanced request offering. And that always starts with a template. So I'm going to create a template. This is going to be of the service request class. This is I want to make a service request with this whenever this is submitted, in other words. And I am going to go through this quickly here, as it's not the primary intent, but if anyone has any questions, please let me know. We should have a little bit of time for that. So I'm going to call this webinar retire hardware asset. And of course, I can fill out as many of these fields as I want. Like the area, hardware, support group might be like an asset management group or whatnot. And for now, what I'm going to do, this is usually how I start, is I'm going to add a manual activity to this service request, and I'm just going to call it placeholder for now. What this will be when we're done here today is a PowerShell activity that just runs a script. So I'm going to hit OK on that. It's a pretty straightforward template. Fields set whatever you like, and it has just a kind of a placeholder activity. Okay, so now that I have that template, I can make my request offering. So on the request offering page, I'm going to click Create Advanced Request Offering. I'm going to name this Webinar Retire Hardware. Then the template I'm going to pick is the one we just made, Retire Hardware. Skip over direct link. So here I am on the user prompts page. So these are the questions that we're going to ask the person to answer before this is submitted. So let's first off make a nice and easy question. Why are you retiring this equipment? Just provide some info. Could be helpful. And let's add some extra fun to this and say we want the user to pick a person first, and then we only want to show that person's assets. So if they pick Nick, then we see all assets that Nick is the custodian of. So that might help them more quickly find some assets that they're retiring. This wouldn't apply maybe to that lab scenario, so that might not be something you want to do in every case, but let's add that in here. So who is the user? Make that a query results prompt, and we'll say what equipment. We're also going to make that a query results. Okay, so now we have to configure these prompts. I'm not going to configure anything for the why question, but let's do the who is this user question first. and I want to make this AD user, or Active Directory user rather. And no criteria, I'll just show all users for now. And what I want to show for those users is their display name. Could also do username just as easily. Okay, so then under options, I don't want them to select multiple. This is just going to be for one person. And that's really all I need to do for this first question. So we ask them, who is the user? And then what equipment? So in this case, I'm going to use not a basic class. So I could go in here and type hardware. And if I pick that, that'll be the basic hardware class. What I want instead is called a combination class, which you might also hear referred to as a type projection. We won't get into all that is entirely, but essentially it is, long story short, and the reason we need this here is we're gonna show hardware assets where the custodian or the owned by user is the person we selected in the previous prompt. And since that owned by user, that custodian is a relationship, it's not a direct property of the hardware asset, we need to use a combination class so that we are able to see that relationship is all. So I'm going to pick the hardware asset full in this case just to show way more than I need to. And now our criteria, we don't want to show all hardware assets because that could be quite a lot in your environment, but we want to look at this owned by user class here. And when the owned by user, or AKA the custodian, when their display name equals, I'm going to hit set token, the answer to who is this user. So this is saying when the custodian's display name is equal to the display name of the person you picked in the previous prompt, then that's going to filter out anything that doesn't meet that criteria. And then when we get those objects, what do we want to display? And I'm going to say the display name, I'll say, we'll be consistent here, right? We'll do serial number and what model I believe I did before. And now we do want them to select multiple here, and this is one potential benefit of doing this way, is they could pick maybe 4 assets, 5 assets, 100 assets all at once to retire rather than just one at a time. So there's potential advantage there, and an incentive actually for your users to actually use this tool because it does save them time. And now when they pick those, I'm going to add that to the related objects items in this case, which will be important when we look at the actual script. Okay. So for the layout, I'm not going to change anything here, but if you, in the future, or if you're unfamiliar with advanced request offering, this is where you can determine what page items show up on. This is where you can determine if certain questions are conditional. So only show this question if they answered a specific way to a previous question. Okay. So in this case, I'm going to keep it all kind of vanilla. Multiple mappings, I'm just going to briefly map this first question, not to notes, but to description. Say reason for retirement. And then I'm going to publish it and hit create. Now we're almost all the way there. We just very briefly need to make a service offering as well, basically a folder for this to sit in. You can kind of think of it that way. So service offerings, all service offerings. I'm gonna make a new one. We shall call this webinar. Sure enough, in the webinar management pack already. I'm gonna add that offering we just made. And I'm gonna publish it. Okay. Now to get that to show up in the portal quickly, I'm going to restart the cache builder. Otherwise, this would show up within 24 hours under normal circumstances. So I'm going to go now. I guess I can get rid of that. To my home page in just a moment here, it should show up. Okay, there it is. So I'm going to click on webinar, retire hardware. Of course, you might want to add an icon or something in there. So why are you retiring this equipment? I'll say because it's old. And I could pick someone in here that doesn't have equipment and they don't have any results, or I could pick somebody who does have equipment, such as end user 1, and these are all, this is all the equipment that they have. One improvement I should have added here, I should first of all should have showed the status in all likelihood, so you know, is this equipment that user had that was retired, or is this equipment that's actually deployed that needs to be retired? So we'll circle back. We can add that if there's time. But you also maybe you want to filter this as well to only show non-retired equipment, right? Like this shouldn't be selectable if it is retired. And actually looking at the items I have there, I believe the only one that's retired is this one, and that's the one that I picked earlier. So I'm gonna pick items 2 and 3 in this case, and we're gonna retire those. So while that loads as well, I want to pull open the list of hardware so you can see it kind of before and after. So I've created my requests. Two things here in tandem. Configuration items, hardware. Okay, so under related items, we're going to see those 2 laptops that I picked in the offering, 2 and 3. And if this was just an ordinary service request, you'd work it like any other. In this case, we have this placeholder request, which is shortly going to be a PowerShell script. And now we did this in this way to just kind of test the script itself. So first of all, 2 and 3 are right here. You'll notice that they are in stock. They're not retired as of now. We're going to change that here shortly. So what I want to do, so what I want to have happen, the end goal is for this just to be a PowerShell activity using that Cireson app, Cireson PowerShell activity. And I want it, when this request is open, I want that to just run. I want that script to just run and retire the assets that were picked. I don't want to have to interact with this at all. I want it all to be automated. So I have that script here. And good practice is to always test it independently first. Make sure you can get this script working without having to rely on PowerShell activity or a request offering or service manager, manage a pack or anything like that. Get it working in isolation first. That's key here. So we're not going to go line by line in the script. I will provide it. It will be on that community page when we're done if you'd like to test this out yourself. But in short, what it's doing is it's taking in the activity itself. It's taking in this activity, which currently is a manual activity and will shortly be a PowerShell activity, and it's figuring out the parent. It's figuring out that these items are these are the items that are related to it, and with that information, it's going in there. It's setting that asset status to retired and updating it. So that's all the code is doing here, is just updating those hardware assets to change the status. So I want to make sure that this works. So if I run it, what it's asking me for is this activity GUID. The activity GUID is the ID, the kind of internal ID you can see behind the scenes that represents this particular item here. It is not MA 486. It's actually a hidden property that you don't see in the interface, but you can see that. So you can actually see that if you look at that activities properties behind the scenes in the model, you can see that, first of all, here are all the other properties. And what we're looking for in this case is this base ID. So I'm actually going to copy that. I'm going to provide that to the script here. Hit enter. And we'll see a couple things happen, hopefully. Yep. So I refresh the page. Those 2 and only those 2 are now retired. We'll see, because it's still active, we actually got these 2 emails that we configured earlier. And if we refresh this page, We even have an action log comment in here. Hardware assets have been retired by automation. And very shortly, you'll see this activity and the whole service request actually complete automatically. So obviously sorry, we'll eventually get there. We haven't done that step yet. So now what we want to do is we want to replace this placeholder. We don't obviously want to go and run a script. We want that script to just run with the properties that are there. We want it to do its thing without having to interact with it. So we're going to now add in the PowerShell activity part of this. So that is going to be done under the library section, and then you'll go to PowerShell scripts. Okay, I actually have one in here already. I'm going to make a new one that I'm going to call, come on, a little console slowness here. I'm going to create a new PowerShell script. I'm going to call this webinar retire hardware asset. I'm just going to put the number 2 on it just to differentiate it. Well, I'll say new on it to differentiate it. This should be published. That checkbox should be checked. And then in here in the actual script itself, I'm going to copy and paste the entire content of the script that I just ran into here. Okay. Now I don't need to click run a separate process. I don't need to click run as user. This is just going to run as the workflow account in Service Manager. No big deal there. So I will hit OK on that. And now I have retire hardware asset new. So I have my script now in Service Manager. And now this is all, again, this is all part of the PowerShell activity app by Cireson. There's also, if you're using Orchestrator, this is a very similar use case, and you could absolutely just do this through Orchestrator as well. You would have to make the runbook in Orchestrator, bring it into Service Manager through the connector, and then this next part is actually going to be pretty similar. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to make a, so you saw earlier when I made the service request, I added in a default EMEA, and then I just changed some properties with it. Well, we're going to make a default PowerShell activity here first. And you might have already done this. You could make this that retirement. You could make this the, you could call this retirement activity directly, but good practice for your reusability. It's nice to have a default one that you can just go to if need be in the future. I'm going to keep I was going to call it default, I guess. In this case, I'll keep the rest blank. So now I need to add that activity, replace the manual activity in my template from before, my service request template. So I'm going to search retire. Here's my webinar, retire hardware asset. I'm actually going to go into the activities tab, maximize this for y'all. I'm actually going to delete this placeholder. We don't need it placeholder anymore. And we're going to hit add. And now I see that I have this default PowerShell activity. So I'm going to add that in here. I'm going to call it something better than default. I'm going to call it retire hardware. And in the script section, I'm going to link to that script, webinar, retire hardware asset new. Okay, so my script populates right in there. And then you also just make sure to scroll down a bit and map properties if you did add properties. And in this case, the activity GUID should be mapped to the activity base ID. Okay. Be very careful. ID is referring to MA1234 or SR456. The base ID is referring to that GUID itself, that long string of letters and numbers that's behind the scenes. There's also parent base ID. Parent base ID refers to the direct parent's GUID. So the service request contains this activity, and they both have GUIDs. So if you wanted to get the service request GUID, you could do that. However, it's kind of a trap, because you could have a service request that has a parallel activity, and that parallel activity has a manual and PowerShell activity in it. And if that were the case, then the parent is actually the parallel activity. It only goes one layer up to find the direct parent. So by picking that, you could be picking the service request, but you're not, depending on where this is in the workflow, it could be in a parallel activity, and maybe that's not the case anymore. So we like to do the activity, base ID, this exact object, and then in the actual PowerShell code, we can get the top level parent, and that's what this function does all by itself, as it gets that top level parent. Does so recursively to kind of keep going up until it finds that service request level object, but not anything we have to get into today, or you even have to understand, frankly. You can just kind of use this function as it's written here, kind of a black box approach of not having to look at the contents of that, just knowing that what it does is it gets the top level activity. So make sure you do your mappings. That's something I see people frequently miss, just because they have to scroll down a little bit. So easy to miss there. So I'm going to hit OK, and then I'm going to hit OK again. So I've now just replaced that manual activity with this PowerShell activity. And all I'm doing there is I'm just having the script now run without having to open up the ISC, PowerShell console and hit run. Do so automatically. So I also, while I'm here, we're doing okay on time, so I will also add in here with this equipment criteria. I also want to add a filter on here. I only want to see ones where the status, well, the HW asset status does not equal retired, we'll say. And then I also want to display the actual status, because that would be helpful, right? So hardware asset status. Otherwise, I'll keep that largely the same. Okay, so now I will restart Cache Builder here to get that updated more quickly. I'll go to the home page. Okay, so we see that hardware asset status has now been added there. So I'm going to go ahead and pick end user 1, and we see that they only have one laptop left for end user 1. So we're going to click that in this case and click save. And I forgot to fill out this field. Okay. So SR498. Okay. Now this is going to look very similar. Instead of that MA, it now has the AC499. AC is just the 2-letter code for the PowerShell activity that we configured just a moment ago. It looks pretty similar, but it's not something you need to even interact with, since it's just going to run. So we now have this retire hardware activity there. Under related objects, we see that we have stock laptop 427, etc. Number 4, anyway. Let's go look at that over here, the console. Okay, it's actually retired now. That moved quickly. Let's refresh this page. Okay, so a couple things happened. The retire hardware activity completed. We have our pop-up saying that asset status has changed. The service request itself, excuse me, has completed. We have this message down here that hardware assets have been retired by automation. And if we actually look at this, I know I didn't get to it in time. It was not retired before. I think it was in stock before. but we can see that in the history of that asset that it's been changed. So if we go over to the history, we'll see there it is. The workflow account has changed it from in stock to retired. So that happened quicker than I thought, which is probably a good thing. So there's kind of an example of how you could kind of put a front end onto some automation, let your users fill out these, they're kind of requests almost, requesting to retire this hardware, and then letting a script just go and take care of it, but while still reusing, whether manual or automated, the same notification that's needed for you to maybe do your next steps as an asset manager, or just keep some in a loop or whatnot. So yeah, some ways that you can kind of free up. You can do it. You can do this in bulk as well, as we showed. We actually showed that the first time. So perhaps you didn't have this filter on originally, and you just pick all equipment in a particular location, maybe a lab that you're refreshing, and that prevents you from having to go and update those things manually. And you could add extra permissions on here. Maybe certain analysts only have the ability to see and retire certain types of assets and so forth. So a little bit of extra controls over kind of opening it up and letting folks just change whatever they want. Okay, so back here. Okay, so we've kind of gone through all this. Analyst submitted the request, script ran and changed necessary fields, and then that notification still sent. So, now that you've automated retirement, you can finally take that vacation, everyone's dream. And what comes next? So when you get back from vacation, or maybe the entire time you're on vacation, you'll just think about work, of course. Hopefully not. But you'll, when you get back, you're starting over again. You're continual, that same continual service improvement idea from ITIL and service management, it applies to asset management and related services as well. These are always changing, they can always improve. So take a look at what's not working, how it can be improved, and figure out, to the point in our earlier webinars, we got to figure out why this isn't working. Is it a process breakdown? Is it maybe the automation, the script we wrote isn't working? Or are folks just not trained? Do we not have that material for them readily accessible? So figure out what's gone wrong, and then kind of assess what's next, be it training, fixing a process that doesn't make sense, cleaning up portal forms, adding some custom tasks that help drive it, adding automation, adding some notifications. Whatever you need to do, continue to assess that, continue to improve on it. And there are lots of tools here in the Service Manager and Cireson toolkit to be able to do that. So on that note, are there any questions from anyone today? And while you all take a second to type that, I do want to quickly plug this as well. So we have a 30-day free trial of CAM if you're interested. You just want to contact team@cireson.com and we can get you set up with that if you're not already using Cireson Asset Management. If you need any help with implementation and training, so I actually run the consulting team here at Cireson, and I'm happy to have a chat with you, or we can get our sales team and have a chat as well about what your needs are. If you liked anything you saw in this webinar series and you'd like to take a crack at it, by all means, please do. And if you need some help or some additional training to help get you to where you want to go, myself and my team that's what we're here for. We're here to help with implementations. From the very beginning of an implementation to you've had it implemented, you want to improve, or you want to do some very specific automation or some customization, all stuff that we can do on the services side here at Cireson. So again, team@cireson.com, we can get you set up and have some of those conversations if you're interested. And last but not least, I want to mention again the Cireson community. It's been mentioned a few times here on these webinar series. It's a great place to go ask questions amongst your peers. Cireson is there as well, and we're answering questions as well as other folks in the community. It's a great place to go to we're all kind of facing similar problems, similar challenges, and we can all help each other out there. Nice community forum where you can help other folks out, and in turn they'll help you out with whatever challenges you're facing. And on a related note, all of the webinars here, as well as the extra material that was demoed here, the scripts and so forth, they're all on a post in the community. under the videos page. So that's all I have for today. Wanted to keep a few minutes for questions, and we have 10 minutes exactly here if anyone has any follow-up questions. Really, for anything we covered today, I'm happy to go back and answer some follow-up questions from the stuff that we demoed in the other webinars as well. So I'll pause there, and if anyone has any questions, just go ahead and type them in the questions. Cool, thanks, Nathir. Glad you enjoyed it. Thanks, Thomas. Glad you enjoyed it. It doesn't sound like we have too many questions so far. I'll hang on another couple minutes in case you do. Good luck, Susan, implementing in January. If you need any help, we're here. Let us know. Okay, so Ben asked a question, would you mind showing how you can restrict the service request to a group of users like the asset managers group? I sure can. So I can show most of that. I can talk through it anyway. So you're referring to showing, Ben, you're referring to showing these different icons to different people. So for example, this you would only want to be able to be seen by an asset managers group. Okay. So what that is, that's a request offering, is the term for it, and that can be permissioned via what's called a catalog item group. So under library groups in the console, you can create a catalog group. Maybe we can show this in time. We'll try. So I'm going to call it asset specific offerings. I must again store it in my webinar management pack. Now there's this included members section, which I recommend you actually skip and go into dynamic members instead. And then you'd pick service offering and filter by category. So right now, I think I only have a general category, but you would likely have some other categories here. So you would have, I typically like to do it like all public offerings, maybe internal IT offerings, asset management offering, asset manager offerings. So make sure that request offering we just made goes into a service offering rather than being general, just webinar. It's in that bucket of these are the asset management group stuff only. So you would tag that there to create that list value first, and then tag it, set it there, and then you actually can next all the way through that. So that is a helpful way to permission the catalog item groups dynamically, so that as you make more content, if it goes in that service offering, it's permissioned with everything else at that offering. So it's a little bit less administrative, a little less administration to keep that up as you make more and more content. Now, how that offering would be used is you would actually do that in the user roles section in the console under administration user roles. So you would make, good practice is typically to make 2 roles as a starting point. Advanced operator would contain all your analysts, and end user would contain all your non-analyst users. And I'm gonna call this webinar asset offerings group. And management pack, I'm just gonna select all in this case. Queues are not relevant here, so I'm gonna select none. Those are groups of work items, and we're permissioning catalog items. Configuration item groups, we're going to also turn off. We don't want to give more than we need to in this role. The only thing that this role is doing is providing access to those catalog item groups. So the catalog item group kind of sits at the top, and it contains service offerings based on the criteria you set. And those service offerings contain the individual request offerings. That's what we actually made today, the question and answer part. So those would sit inside of those service offerings, like all asset requests, all IT requests, all public requests. And so on your end user role, your generic kind of end user role, you would tick the box for all public offerings. And for this specific role, which is intended just to grant access to the asset specific items, you would tick this box for asset specific offerings. And you don't need to give anything else here, tasks, views, templates, turn that all off. And then in this case, you would add in your, I don't remember what I called it, AM something. You would add in your asset managers group here into the users section. And then them just being a member of that AD group, and in turn a member of that role, they have that catalog item group. And so those users in that user role would see this set of offerings, and users that are just in that end user role alone that didn't have access to that offering, they wouldn't see that. So that's how you can kind of permission. You need a user role per like set of offerings, and that's how you can kind of turn on a whole set for a certain group and turn off a set for the others. That makes sense? Any follow-up questions there, or any other questions in general? Okay, great. No problem. Let's see who else we have on. Any other questions from rest of the attendees here? So Nathir asked, what about Arabic, so different languages? In general, so different languages can be done. So there's a lot to consider with different languages. So first off, if you have the portal installed, you would install that second language as part of the installer, and that would allow users to flip between English or Arabic or whatever other languages that you had enabled. And that'll take care of a lot of it, like all of these nodes and what you see on the different pages in the portal, that would just be translated based on our out-of-box translations, which might need to be looked at to make sure they'd actually make sense in the local language. But you can override those and make them make sense for your organization. So that's kind of step one for different languages. Lists are kind of treated separately. I don't think I have time to get into that here today, but you would want to update your list values as well. So I guess you just log in the quickest, easiest way to do it is log in your console as an Arabic user and add the values in that language. So it'll add them to that locale if you're logged in as that type of a user. And then if you switch back to English and you added list values, they would add in English. You can also export the management pack and edit it there to get that up to speed. And then as far as the request offerings part, which is what we showed here today, to get that to be in a different language. So you actually need to make a request offering per language. And really one main reason for that is these questions, they don't have a translation out of box, of course, because we came up with them on the fly. So this whole offering actually went into this service, that whole request offering, went into this service offering called Webinar. And you'll notice that had it had a language associated to it. So this, if you're in a multi-language environment, waiting for it to load here. So language I kept as blank, which is just going to be whatever default language I have installed, which is English in this case. If you had another language, you would have to pick that in this dropdown. There are a few other things to do to get that set up. We have a knowledge base article about it if you want to search our support portal, and we could also help you out if you need any additional help with that. But essentially that would show this is webinar offerings in Arabic, and then you'd have a webinar offerings in English. And then depending on what language you're using, the different subset would show. So the right language shows up for the user using the right language. lot more to it. Can talk about languages and for a while, but hopefully that gets you started there. Okay. Well, on that note, we're out of time here, right at the hour mark here. So hope everyone got some good info out of the session. If you do have any follow-up questions, please hit me up on the either team@cireson.com here, and feel free to post in the community as well, either on this post or elsewhere, and we'll get you some answers if you still have any outstanding questions here. So thank you all for attending, and have a great day. Talk to you all later.